The moment Maya stepped out of the kitchen and saw the man sitting alone in booth 7, she felt something shift in the air. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get when a storm is coming and the wind goes quiet before it hits. She had been working the Tuesday night shift at the Blue Anchor Diner for 4 years. 4 years of carrying plates, refilling coffee cups, and wearing a smile that customers never really looked at. She knew every regular. She knew every stranger. She knew the difference between someone who was tired and someone who was waiting. This man was waiting. He was somewhere in his mid-50s. His hair was neat and dark with silver at the temples. His suit was not the kind you bought off a rack. His hands were flat on the table, completely still, the way hands are when the person they belong to has learned how to be very, very patient. Maya walked over with her notepad. He ordered water. Not coffee. Not the Tuesday special. Water. And when she set the glass in front of him, he did not look at her. Not once. His eyes were fixed on the window, on the parking structure that sat across the street from the diner, its gray concrete levels stacked in the dark like the floors of an empty building that nobody wanted. She went back to the counter. Her coworker, a lanky 22-year-old named Pete, who always smelled like cinnamon and never stopped talking, was restocking sugar packets. "Booth 7 order anything?" he asked. "Water," Maya said. Pete made a face. Generous tipper incoming. She almost smiled. Almost. The diner was mostly empty at that hour. A couple in the far corner sharing a slice of pie. An older man named Earl who came in every Tuesday night. Because, as he had explained to Maya once, his apartment was too quiet since his wife passed. A woman in a green coat reading something on her phone. Untouched soup going cold in front of her. Normal. All of it normal. Except booth 7. Maya poured Earl his third coffee without him asking. He looked up at her and said, "You look like you're thinking hard about something." "Just tired," she said. He nodded like he did not quite believe her but was too polite to say so. She was not tired. She was watching. The man in booth 7 had turned his head slightly, just enough to get a better angle on the window. She had seen that movement before, in the training sessions she attended every week without fail, where her instructor, a retired defense trainer named Colin, used to say that the way a person positions their body tells you everything they will never say out loud. This man was tracking something outside. She moved behind the counter, picked up a rag, and started wiping down the surface nearest the window. Casual, unhurried. From that angle, she could see the parking structure clearly. 3 cars had pulled in within the last 20 minutes. She knew because she had been watching without meaning to. The way you watch something that your instincts flag before your brain has caught up. None of the drivers had gotten out. In a parking structure, at nearly midnight, 3 separate cars, no one getting out. She set the rag down. Her hands were steady. That was one thing Colin had drilled into her for years. Hands steady. Breathing steady. The moment your body starts performing panic, your mind follows it down. She breathed. She thought. The man in booth 7 took one small sip of his water and set the glass down without looking at it. His eyes never left the window. A second man came through the diner's front door at 11:52. Maya heard the bell above the door and turned in time to see him. Broad through the shoulders. Jacket that sat a little high on the left side, which meant something was underneath it. He moved through the diner the way people move when they have scanned a room before they walked into it. He slid into booth 7 across from the first man. They did not greet each other. The second man leaned forward, said something in a voice too low to carry. 4 words, maybe 5. Maya was at the far end of the counter and could not hear a syllable. The first man listened, did not react, did not nod, just listened. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket, set a $20 bill on the table, which was 5 times the price of the water he had barely touched. He did not look at Maya. He walked toward the door. The second man followed him. They crossed the street together and disappeared into the mouth of the parking structure. Maya stood very still for 3 seconds. Then she walked to the back of the diner, past the kitchen where the cook was scraping down the grill, through the narrow hallway that smelled like dish soap and old wood, and out the side door into the small alley, where she was technically not supposed to smoke because she did not smoke. She stood in the cold and called her cousin Leon. Leon had worked transit security for 11 years before a knee injury ended it. He still had contacts. More importantly, he still had the kind of brain that filed things away without being asked to. He picked up on the second ring. "It is almost midnight," he said. "I know. I need you to run a plate." A pause. "Maya. Please." She gave him the number she had memorized during her break, when she had walked to the diner's front window under the pretense of checking the weather, and looked at each of the 3 parked cars with the specific, unhurried attention she had trained herself to apply to things she did not want to look like she was looking at. Leon went quiet. Not the quiet of someone thinking. The quiet of someone reading something they did not want to read out loud. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "The diner." "Stay inside." Leon. "Maya, I mean it. Stay inside. I am going to make a call." He hung up. She stood in the alley for another moment. The cold was sharp and clean. Somewhere a few blocks over, a car horn went off and faded. The city at midnight was never fully silent. It just got quieter in the places you least expected. She thought about what Colin had said to her class, maybe a year ago, during a session on situational awareness. He had a way of saying things once and meaning them to last. "Your safety," he had said, "is not always about what you do. Sometimes it is entirely about what you notice before anyone else does. The person who sees it coming has already survived the first part." She had noticed. She went back inside. Earl was pulling on his coat, getting ready to leave. He raised a hand at her as he passed. "Good night, Maya." "Good night, Earl. Be safe out there." He patted his coat pocket where he kept his phone, the way older people do when they want to signal that they are prepared, and pushed through the door. Pete was counting his tips at the counter, organizing quarters with the concentration of someone doing surgery. Maya picked up the rag again, went back to the window. The parking structure across the street was dark on the upper levels. The second floor had a single light fixture that had been half broken for as long as she could remember. It threw a pale, uneven light across the concrete railing. She could see the edge of one of the parked cars from where she stood. Nobody had moved. She checked the clock above the register. 11:59. She thought about Leon's voice when she had read him the plate. She thought about the man in booth 7 who had ordered water and stared at that window for nearly 12 minutes, without once looking at his glass. She thought about the jacket on the second man, the way it sat high on the left side. She picked up her phone. She dialed. Not Leon this time. She dialed the number that Colin had made every single person in her class save on the first day of training. Not because he expected them to need it, because he believed that the difference between a situation going wrong and a situation being managed almost always came down to one thing: how fast the right call got made. She pressed the phone to her ear. It rang once. She told them the address. She told them what she had seen. She used the words Colin had taught her to use. Plain and specific. No guessing. No drama. She gave them the plate numbers. All 3. She described the 2 men who had walked into the structure. She told them how long ago. The voice on the other end asked her to stay on the line. She kept the phone in her hand and looked at the parking structure through the diner window. The broken light on the second floor flickered once. Then it went still. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not shake. She breathed. She waited. Across the street, in the concrete dark of that parking structure, something was already happening. She did not know the details yet. She did not know the names or the history, or the years of territory and tension that had compressed themselves into this single Tuesday night in Bridgeport. She knew only what she had trained herself to know. When something is wrong, your body tells you before your mind does. She had learned to listen to that, and she had already listened. She had already called. She had already done the thing that most people, in that same moment of quiet dread, would have talked themselves out of doing. The rest was still coming. But Maya Reyes had already started. The diner hummed around her. The pie couple asked for their check. Pete stacked the last of the sugar packets and stretched his arms above his head with a groan. Somewhere across that street, in the levels above the broken light, 6 men were waiting in the dark. They were not waiting for a waitress. That was their first mistake. The second one was still a few minutes away. Maya had stepped outside once more, this time through the front door of the diner, standing on the sidewalk in her work apron with her arms crossed against the cold. She was not supposed to leave the floor during a shift unless it was a break, and this was not a break. Pete called after her through the glass. She held up one finger. He made a face and went back to his sugar packets. The street between the diner and the parking structure was exactly 60 feet wide. She had never measured it. She knew it the way you know the layout of a place you have walked 1,000 times, the way your feet remember the distance before your brain decides anything about it. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the structure. The first floor was open to the street. She could see the orange glow of the payment machine near the entrance ramp. She could see the base of the concrete ramp curving upward to the second level. She could see 2 of the 3 parked cars from this angle. Still no movement. No one coming out. No one going in. The 2 men from the diner had gone up. She knew it the way she knew everything she had trained herself to know. Not a feeling. An assessment. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Leon. "Where are you?" he said. "Sidewalk. Outside the diner." "Maya. Get back inside." His voice was different now. Low. Controlled in the specific way that people get controlled when they are trying not to show that something is serious. "Tell me what the plate came back to," she said. A pause. "I cannot tell you that on the phone." "Then tell me if I was right to call." Another pause. Longer. "Yes," he said. "You were right. Now please go back inside and wait for units." "How far out are units?" He did not answer that immediately, which was itself an answer. "Leon. They are coming," he said. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. There is a lot of ground to cover tonight. 4 minutes. 5 minutes. She looked at the structure. She looked at the entrance ramp. She thought about what could happen in 4 minutes in a concrete parking structure, when 6 people have been positioned and waiting, and the thing they have been waiting for has just walked in. "I have to go," she said. "Maya. Maya, do not go in there." She ended the call. She stood on the sidewalk for exactly 2 more seconds, not hesitating, calculating. There is a difference, and it is the most important difference in the world. Hesitation is your fear making decisions for you. Calculation is your training making decisions instead. Colin had said that, many times, in many different ways, but always the same idea underneath. Fear is loud, training is quiet. Listen to the quiet one. She crossed the street. Not at a run. That was the instinct she shut down first. Running announces you. Running changes the sound of the space you're entering. She walked at a controlled pace, heels soft on the concrete, the same pace she used when she crossed a diner floor with a full tray and didn't want anything to shift. She took the east stairwell. Not the ramp, which was the obvious entry and would be visible from the upper level. The stairwell on the east side was tucked around the corner of the structure, access through a narrow door that most people never noticed because most people were looking at the ramp. She had noticed it 3 years ago, on a night she had worked late, and parked here, because the lot behind the diner was full. She had filed it away. Not for any reason, just because filing things away was a habit she had built so slowly and carefully over years that it no longer felt like effort. The door was unlocked. It always was. The latch had been broken for months. She went in. The stairwell smelled like concrete and cold and something faintly metallic. The fluorescent light above her buzzed and held. She took the stairs up to the second level with her back near the wall, and her feet placed at the outer edges of each step, which made almost no sound at all. Colin, during a session on movement and entry, had once made the entire class practice walking stairs for 45 minutes. Some of them had laughed at first, not after. Where your foot lands, he had said, is where your noise comes from. Control the foot. You control what they hear. She controlled the foot. At the top of the second level, she stopped. There was a fire door between the stairwell and the parking level. She put her hand against it, flat, the way the man in booth 7 had put his hands on the table, feeling. Nothing on the other side. No sound traveling through the metal. No vibration. She pressed her ear to the door for 3 seconds. Voices, low, more than 2. She could not make out words, only the register and the rhythm, which told her enough. Multiple people, close together, on her side of the structure, toward the west wall, away from the east stairwell. She opened the door. 1 inch, 2. Enough to see without being seen. The second level of the parking structure was mostly empty. 4 cars parked in a loose diagonal along the west wall, which was the only wall with functioning lights. The broken fixture she could see from the diner cast its uneven pale wash across the central lane. She counted 6 figures in a loose cluster near the far end of the lane, past the parked cars. They were not all facing the same direction, which meant they were mid-conversation, not yet committed to an action. One of them had his back fully to her, which told her where the focus of the group was pointed. Toward the 2 men she had watched walk in from the diner. The first man, the one who had ordered water and stared at the window for 12 minutes, stood at the center of it all, not backed against anything, standing open in the lane, which was either confidence or calculation, or both. The second man was to his left, not beside him, behind him by half a step. Maya read the geometry of the whole thing in about 4 seconds. She had learned to read rooms the way other people learn to read words, something you practiced until it became faster than thought. She understood what she was looking at. She also understood what was about to happen if the situation continued undisturbed for the next 60 to 90 seconds. She stepped through the door. She did not run. She did not shout. She moved along the east wall, using the parked cars as cover, staying low, keeping her feet quiet. The voices on the far side were louder now, still below what you could call heated, still in the register of conversation. But the rhythm had changed in the last few seconds, the way the cadence shortens when people have finished deciding something and are moving toward doing it. She had 14 feet of open lane to cross. She crossed it. What happened next was not a scene from a film. There were no dramatic pauses. There was no moment where everyone stopped and looked at her, and someone said something memorable. Real things do not work that way. Real things are fast and specific, and almost nothing like what you imagine them to be. She moved without announcement into a position between 2 of the 6 and the man who had ordered water. Not dramatic, not performative. Functional. What she knew how to do, she did. Quickly, quietly, without explaining herself. The first man she engaged went down before he knew she was in the room. That is not an exaggeration. That is how trained physical response works when it is applied against someone who has not accounted for it. Speed, angle, commitment, down. The second man turned. He had better reaction time. He was larger. He had the advantage of weight and reach, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been surprised in a situation like this one before. He did not have the advantage of expecting a woman in a diner apron to know how to take that confidence apart in about 4 seconds. She did not fight the way she had been afraid she would fight if it ever came to it, which is to say with adrenaline running everything and her training running away from her. She fought the way she had drilled, controlled, step, angle, weight, pressure. Her instructor's voice in the back of her head not as a memory but as a structure, a scaffolding her body moved along. The second man did not go down the same way the first one had. He was harder to finish. She did not finish him. She contained him. That was enough. By the time the sound of sirens reached the structure from 3 blocks out, 2 of the 6 were on the ground. 2 were against the west wall in positions that made further aggression difficult and inadvisable, and 1 had fled toward the vehicle ramp and run directly into the responding unit coming up it. The 6th sat down against a concrete pillar with his back to it, and his knees pulled up, and he did not look at anyone. The man who had ordered water stood in the center of the lane. His jacket was not even wrinkled. He looked at Maya with an expression that was not quite gratitude, and not quite surprise, and not quite anything she had a name for. She looked back. The same way she looked at customers who sat at a table for 45 minutes without acknowledging she was standing there. Patient, steady, waiting for this to be over so she could go back to work. The sirens were very loud now. She put her hands out to her sides, open, palms forward, which was the thing Colin had taught every single person in his class to do, the moment law enforcement arrived in a situation where they were the unknown presence. Make yourself readable, he had said. The first 10 seconds after uniforms arrive, You are a variable. Be the variable that requires the least explanation. She was readable. She was also still in her diner apron. An officer came up the ramp and saw her first. She said, "I am the one who called. My name is Maya Reyes." He looked at her. He looked at the rest of the second level. He looked back at her. "Okay," he said, in a voice that meant he had at least 3 questions, but was going to start with securing the scene first. "Okay," she said back. Behind her, more units were moving up the ramp, voices on radios, the sound of the situation being organized, named, and handled. She lowered her hands. She was still breathing steady. Her hands were still steady. That, she thought, was not nothing. The fluorescent light above the second level buzzing, and the smell of concrete, and the sound of boots on the ramp, and radios going back and forth, and Maya Reyes standing in the middle of it, with her arms at her sides, and her apron still tied around her waist. That was what the first officer at the scene would later describe, and that was what ended up in the report, and that was the image that stayed with every person who had been in that parking structure that night, long after everything else had been processed and filed and turned into paperwork. The officer's name was Dale Mercer. 12 years on the force. He had responded to a lot of things in 12 years. He had not responded to anything quite like this. He secured the perimeter first, the way he was trained to do, moving his colleagues into position around the level, and making sure the individuals on the ground were separated, and the situation was no longer in motion. He was good at this. He was methodical and calm, and he did not ask unnecessary questions while he worked. When the scene was held, he came back to Maya. "You called this in?" he said. "Yes." "And you are the one who did this?" She looked at him. "I responded to an active threat situation." "Yes." Mercer looked at the level, at the 2 men still on the ground, waiting for paramedics, at the 2 against the wall, at the one sitting under the pillar, at the man in the suit standing in the center of the lane, who had still not moved, and was watching everything with the flat, patient eyes of someone who had seen a lot of things in his life, and was in the process of filing this one away. "Ma'am," Mercer said, "can you tell me your training background?" She told him. He wrote it down without expression. Then he said, "And you work at the diner across the street?" "Yes." "As a waitress?" "Yes." He looked at his notepad. He looked at the parking level. He looked back at her. "Okay," he said, for the second time that night, with the same tone, meaning the same thing, that there was more to understand here, and he was going to take his time understanding it. The paramedics arrived. The individuals on the ground were assessed and transported. No one had life-threatening injuries. That was not an accident. Maya had trained for situations involving aggression, but she had also trained for proportionality, which is the hardest thing to hold on to when your heart is going fast, and the space is tight, and the decision between too much and enough is measured in fractions of a second. She had held it. Mercer had a colleague take her details and her statement while he coordinated the rest of the scene. The colleague was a younger officer named Grace Tillman, who had only been on the force for 3 years, and who asked her questions with a kind of careful attention that Maya appreciated. No assumptions, no tone, just questions, and writing down the answers exactly as they were given. "You noticed the cars from the diner window?" Grace asked. "Yes." "Before you called, you noticed them?" "Yes, about 20 minutes before I called." Grace looked up from her notepad. "Why didn't you call then?" Maya considered the question. It was a fair one. "Because noticing something is not the same as knowing something," she said. "I waited until I knew." Grace wrote that down. The man in the suit, the one who had ordered water and stared at the window, and walked into that structure with the second man who had come through the diner door, was taken to a separate area of the second level, where 2 plainclothes officers Maya had not seen arrive were speaking with him in low voices. She did not watch that part. It was not her part to watch. The night had opened up into something larger than a Tuesday shift, and she was standing at the edge of it looking in, and she understood that she was only one piece of what was now a much more complicated story, with a much longer history behind it. She gave her statement. She answered every question. She did not exaggerate and she did not minimize. She described what she had seen and what she had done and why, in plain words, in the same straightforward way she had described menus and daily specials, and how the coffee machine worked for 4 years. When Grace Tillman closed her notepad, she looked at Maya for a moment. "Can I ask you something that is not part of the statement?" Grace said. "Yes. Were you scared?" Maya thought about that. The real answer, not the modest one or the dramatic one. "I was focused," she said. "Fear uses a lot of energy. I needed the energy for something else." Grace nodded slowly, like she was going to think about that for a long time. The scene on the second level was winding down now. The vehicles that had been positioned in the structure were being processed. Officers were photographing, documenting, moving through the space with purpose. The orange glow of the payment machine at the ramp entrance was still the same. The broken light fixture was still flickering every few seconds, the same way it had been flickering for months, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. Mercer came back over at some point and told her she could go, but that someone would follow up with her in the morning, and she should not go far, which was a strange thing to say to someone who worked a regular shift at a diner 60 feet away. But she understood what he meant, and she told him she would be available. She walked back down the east stairwell, through the broken latch door, across the street, into the diner. Pete was behind the counter doing closing duties, and he looked up when she came through the front door, and then his eyes went to the window behind her, at the lights of the responding vehicles still visible on the second level of the parking structure, and then back to her, and his expression went through about 6 different things in about 2 seconds. "What?" he said. "I will explain in a minute," she said. "I have to wash my hands." She walked to the back. She washed her hands at the sink in the staff bathroom. Cold water, soap. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. Her face was the same face it always was. Nothing wild in the eyes, nothing shaking. She had read once that the human body, after a period of extreme focus and exertion, sometimes releases everything it has been holding all at once, and that this is normal, and that it is the body's way of resetting. She was waiting for that. It had not come yet. She dried her hands, untied her apron, folded it over her arm. She went back out to the counter and sat on one of the stools, and Pete, to his credit, did not ask a single question. He just poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her and went back to restocking the napkin dispensers. She held the cup in both hands. The coffee was hot. The diner was quiet. Outside, through the window, the second level of the parking structure was lit up now, with the white lights of several vehicles she had not been counting. And there were figures moving through the space with purpose, and the whole scene had the organized, deliberate quality of something being taken apart carefully, so nothing important would be missed. She had made that happen. Not alone. Not without Leon's call. Not without the officers who had responded and the years of building and maintaining a system designed to handle exactly this kind of thing. But she had been the one who saw it first. She had been the one who called. She had been the one who crossed the street. Pete finished with the napkins and came to stand on the other side of the counter. He looked at her. He looked at the window. He looked at her again. "Are you okay?" he said. She took a sip of coffee. "Yes," she said. And that was true. The story came out wrong the first time, the way stories almost always do when too many people are telling them at once. The version that moved through Bridgeport fastest was also the most inaccurate one, which is usually how speed and accuracy work in relation to each other. Someone had seen the police vehicles outside the Harbor Street parking structure on Wednesday morning and asked a question, and the question had traveled, and by the time it reached a second person it had collected details that were not quite accurate, and by the time it reached a third person it had collected a few more, and by Thursday there were 3 different versions of the story moving through the city simultaneously, none of them right, all of them containing one element that was consistent. A woman from the diner across the street. That part was right. Everything wrapped around it was negotiable. Maya Reyes went to work on Wednesday morning because her rent was not going to negotiate with her, and the Tuesday tips had been what they always were, which was not enough. She tied her apron, and she took her station, and she carried plates, and refilled coffee cups, and smiled at people who did not look at her, and it was the same as every other day, except that her phone buzzed more than usual. Leon called at 9 in the morning. "How are you?" he said. "Fine. Working. I told you to stay inside." "You did," she said. A pause. "I am not going to argue with what happened," he said, which was the closest he could get, given everything, to saying that he understood why she had done what she did. "But I want you to know that the next time you call me at midnight about a plate, I am calling back with a different kind of answer." "What kind?" "The kind where I tell you what you are actually looking at, before you go make decisions based on half the information." She thought about that. "That seems fair." "Yes," he said. "It does." He hung up. Her instructor, Colin, called at 11. He had heard about it, which she had expected, because Bridgeport was a city of overlapping circles, and his circle was not completely separate from the ones this situation had touched. "I am not going to ask you to walk me through it," he said. "Okay. I will just say that whatever you did it the right way." "How do you know if you did not ask me to walk you through it?" "Because you are calling me from work and not from a hospital," he said. She smiled at the receiver. "Fair." He paused. "Come in this Thursday. We have a lot to talk about." "Training or talking?" "Both," he said. "Mostly training." She hung up and took an order from a man at the counter, who wanted 2 eggs over easy and whole wheat toast, and did not look up from his phone while he ordered, which was fine. She did not need him to look at her. She wrote it down and clipped the ticket to the order line and moved on. The press reached her by Thursday. She had expected that too, eventually. The police report was a matter of record. Her name was in it. Someone had connected the name to the diner, and a reporter from a local outlet had come in on Thursday morning and sat in booth 3 and ordered coffee and waited until she came over. He was young, mid-20s. He had the eager, slightly nervous energy of someone who had practiced what he was going to say and was now adjusting it in real time, because the actual person in front of him was not quite what he had been expecting. "Ms. Reyes," he said, "I am writing about what happened Tuesday night at the Harbor Street parking structure. I was hoping you would be willing to speak with me." She looked at him, at his coffee, at the recorder he had set on the table. "I have 4 tables right now," she said. "I can wait." She came back 20 minutes later when the rush had thinned and Pete was covering the far side of the floor. She sat across from the reporter, which was not something she usually did on the clock, but Pete waved her on when she glanced at him, and she appreciated that. The reporter's name was Ben Carlisle. He was polite and he was careful, and he asked better questions than she had expected, which raised her estimation of him steadily over the course of the conversation. He asked her about her training first, how long she had been doing it, what had drawn her to it initially. She told him the truth, which was that she had started training 6 years ago, after a situation on the way home from a late shift that had made her feel, for a long time afterward, like she was someone things happened to, rather than someone who responded to things. She did not go into detail about the situation. She was not interested in the story of the thing that had started her. She was interested in what had grown out of it. "And you never mentioned the training to your coworkers?" Ben asked. "No." "Why not?" She thought about the honest answer. "Because it is mine," she said. "Some things are yours. You do not need to share them to have them." He wrote that down. He asked her about Tuesday night. She walked him through it the way she had walked the officers through it, plain and specific. What she noticed, when she noticed it, what she did with what she noticed. He asked her at one point, about halfway through, if she had been scared going into the structure. She gave him the same answer she had given Grace Tillman. He wrote it down too. Then he asked the question she had known was coming, the one that everyone was going to ask eventually, phrased in slightly different ways but always the same question underneath. "Why did you go in?" he said. "You had already called. Help was coming. Why not wait?" She looked at him across the table. "Because I was the person with the training," she said. "Not the only person who mattered, but the person who had the specific preparation for that specific moment. And I was already there. Time mattered. My being there mattered." She paused. "I did not go in because I wanted to. I went in because it was the most useful thing I could do with what I had." Ben Carlisle nodded slowly. He looked at what he had written. That is not how most people would think about it, he said. Most people have not been training for 6 years, she said. They would have called and waited, and that would have been the right decision for them. This was the right decision for me. She looked at the clock above the register. I have to get back to the floor, she said. He thanked her. She shook his hand. She went back to work. The piece ran on Saturday. The headline said what it said, and she could not control that. And the headline was not wrong exactly, just louder than she would have chosen. But the piece itself was careful. Ben Carlisle had written it carefully. He had gotten most of it right. He had gotten one thing exactly right. A sentence near the end of the piece that she read on her phone on Saturday morning, in her apartment with a cup of tea, and which she read twice because it was accurate in the way that simple sentences sometimes are, when they are written by someone who is really listening. He had written, "She did not think of herself as a hero. She thought of herself as someone who saw what was happening and knew how to respond to it." That, she said, was the only honest version of the story. She set her phone down. The tea was still warm. Outside her window, Bridgeport was doing what it always did in the early morning, which was waking up slowly and without ceremony, the way cities do when they have been through a long week and are not yet ready to be loud about the next one. She thought about Thursday's training session. Colin had worked her harder than usual, not because she needed correcting, but because that was how he showed he was paying attention. At the end of the session, when she was sitting on the mat rehydrating and her legs were genuinely tired in a way that felt earned, he had said something that she had been turning over since. "You know what the hardest part of what you did is?" he had said. "What?" "Most people spend years training hoping they never have to use it. You used it. Now you have to keep training anyway. Harder, actually, because now you know the training is real." She had nodded. She already knew she would keep going. She had known it before he said it. Thursday morning. Every Thursday morning. Because the training was not about Tuesday night. It had not been about Tuesday night when she started it, and it was not about Tuesday night now. It was about every other night. All the nights that were ordinary and uneventful, and passed without incident, which were the vast majority of nights, the ones that never ended up in a newspaper. Those nights mattered too. You trained for those nights the same way you trained for the other kind. You kept yourself ready not because you expected something, but because readiness was its own kind of living. It kept you present. It kept you inside your own life in a way that was hard to explain to someone who had not experienced it. On Monday, she went back to the diner. Tuesday night shift, the same as always. The parking structure across the street had its broken light on the second level, the same one that had been flickering for months, still doing the same thing it had always done. Some things got repaired quickly. Some things waited. Earl came in at his usual time. He hung his coat on the hook by the door. He settled into his usual seat at the counter. He looked up at her when she brought him his coffee, the one she always poured without being asked. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He did not ask anything else. He accepted his coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the window in the same comfortable, unhurried way he always did, like someone who had learned that the window was worth looking at, even when nothing particular was happening outside it. She moved down the counter. She took an order. She clipped the ticket. She kept moving. The diner hummed around her, warm and ordinary. Outside, the city was doing its thing. She was doing hers, based on real events. Names and certain identifying details have been changed to protect those involved.